Hello everybody, Terry Maguire here, the Director of the National Forum, and delighted to welcome you to this, the first of our webinar in our work-based assessment series. The webinar and the series are being run by the National Forum in partnership with QQI. I'd like to introduce my co-facilitators for today. Peter Cullen from QQI, Associate Professor Geraldine O'Neill from UCD. Geraldine led out on the National Forum Enhancement theme and worked with the National Forum on this theme for over 2 years. I'd also like to welcome our 4 speakers who are going to participate in our fun GOSTA. I'd like to welcome Lorna O'Shea from Trinity College Dublin, Blake Hodgkinson from City of Dublin ETB, Geraldine Doherty from Accounting Technicians Ireland, and John McCallick from UCD Business. And I'll explain to you, if you don't know what a GOST is, I'll explain to you what it is a little bit later on. But first, what we'd like to do is to find out where you're all situated. If you don't have the annotate button, don't worry, just tell us in chat where you're from. Dublin, Galway, GMIT, Carlow, Cork, Limerick, Donegal, Kerry, Wicklow, Sligo, Mayo, Leicester College. Thank you, Rory. I also want to know what best describes where you work. Do we have people from the further education and training sector here? Do we have people from the higher education sector, from the apprenticeships, from a professional body? Colin, if you could put up a poll there and see if people can actually work the poll. Okay, so if you, right, so we have people from FET here, from apprenticeships, people from higher education, professional bodies, we people from enterprise and industry. Excellent. Thank you a million. Okay, so let me tell you, now that we have an idea, you can see that work-based assessment crosses a whole different areas of context. And Michaela, you're very welcome. I see that you're a student in 3rd level, and I'm really delighted that you're joined here. If anybody has a question, they can use the chat button on the side, and then we'll try and answer those questions as we go along. Okay, so the aim of the series, what we're trying to do with this, with our work-based assessment series, is we want to discuss work-based assessment of for and as learning, and we want the approaches that we use and the terminology that we use. We want to discuss and debate the assessment challenges and opportunities across the different contexts within which work-based assessment happens. And we want to explore critical issues for staff or students in the current climate around work-based assessment. So what we're trying to do, I suppose, is to try and generate a national conversation so we get a national understanding of what work-based assessment means in the Irish context. And most importantly, we're trying to build a learning community that together, between our webinars, between now and October, and between October and November, we have the chance to talk offline and to discuss some of these topics. And I'll talk to you later on about how to join that community. And from all of this, what we want to try and identify together is actions for change, for enhancing practice and developing enabling policies. So this is how it's going to work. The next slide, please. So today is the first webinar where we're looking at just trying to identify some of the shared challenges and opportunities. The blue bit in the middle is where we'll work in the learning community together. We'll be sharing insights, we'll be sharing resources that we might have, we'll discuss, then we'll link up with particular themes to focus those discussions. There'll be a second webinar in October, and what we'll cover in that webinar in October will emerge from our discussions both today and over the course of the summer. And then there's a symposium planned for the 19th of November where we'll look for work-based assessment practice and policies and actions for sectoral change. What what kinds of things do we need to do, what kinds of solutions do we need to find, and what do we already know now, and what can we build on. So in order for a piece of context, we're not starting this conversation from a blank slate. QQI developed a green paper, and the National Forum itself has actually been doing some work that is part of its enhancement theme on assessment for, of, and as learning. And what I'd like now is perhaps to ask my colleague Peter Cullen to talk about what some of the main things that came out of the work-based assessment piece in the green paper that we should keep in mind as we're starting our conversation. I'll hand over to you, Peter.
Thanks very much, Terry. It's lovely to be at this group, and it's very reassuring to see how many people have signed up to this event. I'll say a little bit about the green paper, and then I'll focus on the content of the slides, which is specifically about work-based learning. The green paper on assessment was authored by QQI, and it's all about learner assessment as an inference and the associated standards. So it talks about things like the role of the framework of qualifications, the involvement of learning outcomes, and such like. When reading the green paper, it's important to keep in mind how QQI has defined assessment for that discussion. And essentially how it's defined is learner assessment is an inference, which means a judgment or an estimation or an evaluation of a learner's knowledge, skill, or competence by comparison with a standard based on appropriate evidence. Very often we refer to that kind of process as assessment of learning. Now, the forum and many other people for the last 20 or so years have been talking about assessment of, for, and as learning. And this is another way of looking at assessment in the context of teaching and learning. It's a very useful paradigm, but it's important to keep in mind the distinction that I made earlier on about how QQI has handled this in its green paper. So at an abstract level, when you look at the green paper on assessment, almost all of it applies to work-based assessment, because work-based assessment, like any kind of assessment, involves inference, it involves evidence, it involves knowledge, skill, and competence, and it involves standards. But the context is very different from the context in an institution or the context in other kinds of assessment. And that's why it is important to single out work-based assessment and look at what we can do to enhance practice in that area. So we published the green paper on assessment in 2018. And we had a couple of events to enable people to discuss the concepts, and we gathered in a lot of written feedback on the green paper as well. And some of those events, I might say, were done in partnership with the National Forum, and we found that partnership really effective. Among the we've kind of highlighted 6 things that came out of the consultation process. Consistency of work-based assessment. There's a need to, people felt there's a need to ensure confidence that wherever you happen to work, that the assessment that was done on you was consistent from one workplace to another. The second area is inclusivity of work-based assessment. The idea that all kinds of learners have an equal opportunity to achieve their optimal potential, irrespective of disability, handicap, choice of employment, and so on and so forth. The third area is about the involvement of workplace staff. One of the beauties of things like apprenticeship is that you learn alongside somebody who has a huge amount of expertise in what it is you are trying to learn. So you're on a journey, a learning journey, trying to become, somebody like the person that's working with you. And it's crucial that they are involved in the assessment. But that needs work, that raises issues. How do you involve workplace people in assessment? How do you involve mentors in assessment? How do you give workplace staff involvement in design of the tools that are used for assessment and grading and so on and so forth? The fourth area that came up or the theme that came up rather, is academic integrity. It comes up in every area, and it's always important to ensure that learners are being assessed on their own work. And this has to do with not just integrity of the system, but fairness to other learners and so on and so forth. And I might just mention that QQI is doing a lot of work with the higher education institutions at the moment on academic integrity, and there's now a national academic integrity network up and running, and that will be of interest here as well as in the broader context. And we hope to do something similar in further education. Training is another theme that came up. All people involved in work-based assessment need to know what they're doing, obviously. And this applies as much to the workplace staff as opposed to the academic staff. So mentors, supervisors, internship managers, all of these can benefit from in training to ensure what's involved, what the expectations are. And that can help with some of the other things mentioned earlier on, like integrity, like involvement, like inclusivity, like consistency. Quality assurance. How could I not mention quality assurance given QQI? Quality assurance of work-based assessment is important, has been raised as a, it's one of the themes that came up. And here we're talking about the roles of people like work-based assessors, mentors, internal and external, external authenticators and external examiners, and so on and so forth. All of these people have a role in quality assurance. That quality assurance in the context of the workplace, I would comment, has, if you like, it has two entities to report to: the supervising academic entity, and indeed something like an apprenticeship, the employer as well. So those are the 6 themes that we thought were kind of the feedback. And I'm going to leave it at that. I hope I didn't go over time.
Oh, I nearly had my Gosta horn out there for you, Peter. Oh, I nearly had, but not to worry. Look, thank you very much, Peter. And it's important to get that context of the work around the Green Paper. As I said earlier, the National Forum also ran an enhancement theme from 2016 to 18, and it was run out by Associate Professor Geraldine O'Neill from UCD, who worked with the Forum for 2 years. So I'm delighted that Geraldine has come back to support the Forum in this work. And I'm going to hand over to Geraldine now to perhaps give the context of some of the stuff that the National Forum has been doing and to continue our conversation.
Okay, thank you very much, Terry. Yes, I'm delighted to say I was involved in the assessment enhancement theme for 2 years in the National Forum, and it really pushed the idea of assessment for as learning with a particular emphasis on the as learning. And I thought what might be really valuable to share to you, particularly from the enhancement theme, was the work that we did around work-based assessment. But before that, I wanted to particularly explore what we meant by the term assessment. We use it very casually, and this piece of work, which came from the enhancement theme, was a sectoral understanding of some of the language. And I think before we get into conversations around work-based assessment, just want to unpick what we mean by assessment. And this is very familiar to many of you, but I thought I would just go through it very quickly so that we can actually have some working language. And as I say, the link to this document is here in the slides and will be shared with you as well. But when we talk about assessment, we often think of summative assessment. And we often think of the assessment of learning in the green there at the top, and that's the graded assessment. And as Peter was talking, there's many challenges with graded assessment, particularly when you get to consistency and a spectrum of grades. But in the work-based assessment context, often here there's the age-old debate in work-based learning. Do we do pass, fail, competent, not yet competent? Do we give a range of grades? And in different contexts, there are different practices, and these will be very interesting to share as we go along. I won't get into the debate too much here, but just to say that that graded piece, the summative piece, that is teacher led, employer led, the control is often with the assessor. And then down at the bottom in the blue and the purple here is formative assessment. And for what we mean by this here, it's also assessment. It may not get a grade, but it's linked with feedback and the idea of students being able to know how well they're doing. And that is still assessment. And two parts to it, which are very important. The purple on the right is feedback as we probably know it. It's staff giving feedback, and the staff can be employers, can be higher or further education staff, giving feedback to the students so they know how well they are doing. So that's the giving of feedback is in the purple. And in the blue on the left is probably the most important in work-based assessment. And that is the assessment where students can monitor how well they are doing. Really important skill that they get in work-based assessment. And this is where students self-assess and peer assess and really start to judge how well they are doing themselves. So when we talk about assessment in this series and through these webinars, we're talking about these three areas of for and as learning, but they all have slightly different functions, and of course they overlap. So moving on, just very quickly, what we want to do today then is we want to look at what we mean by work-based assessment. We want to look at some key practice insights, and we have 4 lined up for you. We want to share our common challenges and opportunities across different contexts, and we want to finish with 1 or 2 critical issues at the end. So this is what we want to do or started to do already. So just a little bit about the aims of work-based assessment. Smith in 2014 talked a lot about the different aims that people have in work-based. Again, they can be quite mutually, they're not mutually exclusive. The very first one here is that work-based learning opportunities allow students to experience the world of work before graduation, a very wide open kind of an aim. The next one is it allows students to develop or acquire specific skills, very specific skills or attributes. And the third one is where you allow students to apply theoretical disciplinary knowledge to practice. And you may identify with one of these more than the others, depending on your context. The other key aspect of work-based assessment is who are the assessors? Well, certainly from the enhancement theme, we would always have put the student in the middle. The students, as we say, really need to know how well they're doing themselves, and they need to develop that skill. So students are really key assessors of their own work. On the right here is work-based staff, so out in the work placement, employers, practitioners, preceptors, different names for them. And on the left is the institutional staff, and this can be higher or we know further education staff as well. Obviously, this work was done particularly in the higher education sector, but I know many of you are from a range of sectors. So these are the aims and I suppose the assessors of work-based assessment. And that resource that we have there, National Forum 2017, is based on the work we did on work-based assessment. And it's really worth having a look at this resource because it gives you a starter of some of the different methods in kind of pre, during and post work-based assessment. I won't go through them here because we want to keep moving on, but have a look at that resource and what's in that resource. But the first thing we wanted to check is to see who's in the room here. We have a little bit of a sense from the different sectors. So I'm going to ask Colin to share this poll with you. And I want you to pick the one that I suppose you see yourself in most. And these terminology here are from an article by McPhee and Johnston from Canada. And if you see yours, obviously there, start putting in what you think. For example, apprenticeships, most of you know what that might be, and internships, you probably very much identify with that. Some of you might be applied research in the work-based context. Some of you might be from more community services, which is linking with sort of community kind of areas in the community. Cooperative education is a term that's used a bit like internships, but it's often back-to-back and kind of alternating. Clinical placements and field placements, the language that many of you use with as professional staff, and it's part of an accredited body. Work experience is a sort of a shorter term, a bit like co-op but shorter, and traineeship is a very specific group, often with level 4 and 5, I think, is often the term used, traineeship in the Irish context. So if you could vote here, the poll, if you can vote, and we'll start to see what people are bringing up. Give you a minute to do that, and Colin, as maybe you could present the results as they come through. That would be very interesting to see. Okay, whenever you can, Colin. But as I say, some of the starting to come through, so keep voting away there. We'll have a little look. Work experience seems to be the term that a lot of people are using. It's quite a general term. Sometimes that term is used when it's not particularly maybe used mandatory or accredited bodies, but again, we can explore this terminology. Many of you are apprenticeships. Yeah, very interesting. Cooperative education, 5%. I think that's a term that is often used a little bit more in the Canadian context and the American context than in the Irish, but I do know that some people are using that term. Clinical is coming through as 18%. Applied research, interesting, there are some with applied research. Clinical is an interesting one. It's often not necessarily mandatory, but it might be, people often use the word clinics and use sort of clinics. Other, for instance, it'd be great if those who have put other maybe could actually put down the term they use in the chat, so that we can actually have a look at that. I'm going to keep moving on, though. I know this will, and I know when Terry talks back about the learning community, because we will be exploring these terms and answering some of the questions that you're bringing up in the chat there about the terminology. So we will come back to this terminology, but I want to keep moving on here. But interesting, so work experience coming up as the top one. Okay, could you move my slide along there, Colin, for me? Thanks. Okay, Terry, I'm handing back to you here now for the GOSTA.
This is my fun bit. My four speakers have agreed to do a GOSTA with me. Now, this is the first GOSTA that I facilitated, and Tom Farley, if you're there, who is the king of GOSTA, apologies if I don't do it properly. I don't know if any of you have experienced it. But what actually the GOSTA means is that each of our speakers has got 5 minutes, and only 5 minutes, to put across what we ask them to do. So we ask them to describe their context, to outline something that they've done, they feel they do well, to identify one challenge and one opportunity in the particular work-based context that they are involved in. Now, the 5 minutes is fine, and people are normally flexible, but I will be counting them in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'm hoping that somebody's going to go over, because if they do, I get to use this. And this makes a dreadful noise, a really dreadful noise. So nobody really wants to go over. So at 4 minutes, 30 seconds speakers, you'll see me bringing this into view. If we go over the 5 minutes, then I get to blow at my foghorn. I hope somebody does. Anyway, so let's start. So let's start. I'm delighted to introduce our first GOSTeer, who is Lorna O'Shea from Trinity College Dublin. And Lorna, when I'm going to give you a 5-second countdown, and then you can start. Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, GOSTA!
Hello everyone, my name is Lorna O'Shea and I'm the Regional Placement Facilitator in Trinity College Dublin Practice Education Team. So I have a very short period of time here, so I'm going to be flying through a few slides. But firstly, just to give it a bit of context to the Trinity College Dublin Occupational Therapy Practice Education System. So each student has one placement for each academic year. Each placement very much varies in terms of length, so anywhere between 2 and 11 weeks. There's different expectations of performance and different support provision depending on the student's year. We use lots of different models of placement. So I suppose the most commonly used one would be the one-to-one traditional model, where it's one student to one practice educator. Another very common one would be the split placement model, so one student to 2 practice educators. It's a competency-based assessment, so the student will be assessed as being competent or not competent at the end of the placement. This assessment is completed by the assigned practice educator, and it's done at 2 stages throughout the placement, so at the halfway point and the final point. Students in occupational therapy are assessed in terms of 5 main competencies. So they are communication, occupation, occupational therapy process, professional development, and professional behaviour. So that's just a little bit of context setting. In terms of something that we do well, we use what's called a timelines and expectations document. What this is, it's a document that outlines the expectations of performance for each week as per the competency area on the student's assessment form. So essentially it provides very explicit examples to both the student and the practice educator as to where they should be at and what they should be doing at each stage of the placement. So it's very similar in many ways to a rubric, and it's a tool that's used by both the practice educator and the student. So from the practice educator's point of view, we advise them to use it in conjunction with the student's assessment form. And then in terms of the students, we advise them to use it in conjunction with their learning contract, where they set their learning objectives. It's a very useful document. It's very beneficial, particularly in cases where you have an under or overperforming student. And overall, it's practical, useful, accessible. It assists with assessment for learning, assessment of learning. It significantly increases assessment literacy for both the student and the practice educator. And overall, it enhances the assessment process. So moving on into one challenge. The one challenge for us would be the use of effective feedback in maximising learning and assisting with the assessment process. So there's lots of issues, I suppose, on the ground and practically that we're seeing in terms of practice education placements. But just to give you a few, one challenge would be fear and guilt of practice educators. So practice educators may be finding it very difficult to give negative or constructive feedback to students. Maybe poor delivery. And when I say poor delivery, things like maybe practice educators only giving student feedbacks during formal supervision sessions, feedback maybe that lacks structure, maybe the practice educator isn't relating it back to the student's competency development, or they're maybe not clarifying that the student is understanding what they're saying. Another common one then would be limited opportunities created by either the practice educator or the student in closing the feedback loop. And then from the student's point of view, maybe not understanding or appreciating the feedback that they've been given, taking it very personally, which is a very common one, and maybe not acting on it effectively or having difficulty doing that. That's a quick overview of one of the challenges. In terms of an opportunity, so when you review the Trinity Practice Education occupational therapy system, really there is probably greater opportunity for us to increase the student involvement in the assessment process by supporting increased self and peer evaluation process. So I suppose that's assessment as learning, and I think that there is scope for us to improve this a little bit more. And why is it important? I think we've already alluded to this, that students really need to be involved in their assessment. It's pivotal to their learning. How can we promote it? There's lots of different ways that are very practical, encouraging students to self-evaluate prior to any debrief session with their practice educator, whether it's formal or informal, encouraging and supporting peer support among students, getting them to use tools and resources that are accessible, easy to use. So I've talked about a few of them already, just in terms of their learning contract, assessment form, timelines and expectations. But in addition to that, there's things like reflective templates, feedback templates, clinical observation aids. So there's lots, I think, that can be done. There's been an enormous amount of progress made with this over the last year or two, but I think there's scope. It's a very important concept. It's a gradually evolving concept, and I think it's something that there's scope to develop a little bit further over the next few years. So I can see Geraldine. So thank you so much for listening. And if you want any further information on any of these resources, you can look on the website or contact me directly. So thank you very much.
Oh, Lorna, you set a standard there, 4 minutes and 40 seconds.
Not bad.
Not bad at all. Not bad at all. But I didn't get to blow the horn. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Lorna. That was really useful. I'd now like to ask our second speaker, Blake Hodgkinson from City of Dublin ETB, to begin. You have to wait now, Blake, till I count you in. You've got 5 minutes. So Blake is going to talk about the further education and training work-based learning. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Costa!
Hello, I'm Director of Further Education and Training with the City of Dublin ETB. I'm not going to talk about apprenticeships. I'm not going to talk about traineeships. I'm going to talk about the other stuff. And hang on, sorry, let me just try and get this working. No, okay, we have to go backwards. Come on, let's go. Okay. So now one of the first examples I was going to pick, the aim of our work experience varies from program to program, from cohort to cohort, and that'll become apparent as we go through it. And also so does the assessment and what we're looking for with the different cohort of students, because they're all coming from different aspects, different walks of life. And we have to cater for that. Now, I've put up a slide here of Colester College, and they have quite an interesting partnership going on with Keddington's. And Keddington's are, a data IT type company. And what they're doing is they're offering training to the students, and they've actually put quite a bit of resource into deliberately training students who are on the data course with them, with the cabling and so on. And UniCredit then are another group who are working with the same students, but what they're doing is they're offering basically a 12-week placement over the summer. So they're re-enhancing the learning, which is really adding to basically the teaching, learning, and then ultimately the assessment of what happens. I put in the picture of that funky building there because I visited that in Alsace-Lorraine, and it's one of these kind of make a Lego type house. You order it and then it gets delivered. And they talked to me about a fascinating one that they made bulletproof for a mountain up in Switzerland, but that's a whole other story. But the level of integration they have of students coming in for training is absolutely amazing. Now, I've also thrown up this slide here because the remit of, we have another project called OWL, which is Oireachtas Workplace Learning. And it would be for students who have disabilities. And the Oireachtas, particularly the Ceann Comhairle, took it under his wing. And the teachers go in and teach in the venue. So they don't get taught in our classrooms, they get taught in the Oireachtas. They go on rotation through different departments. And there's been 100% success of them getting employment in the different departments. So that to me is, there's a different requirement and a different emphasis going into that work assessment, work learning. But the real gig for me in both of the ones I've pointed to so far is the engagement with the employers, the engagement and the feedback and the ongoing meetings between us as an education provider and them as the potential trainers. And I put in Marino College, they had a dental nursing course which is relaunching next year. But what was interesting was they had a different structure to their work placement where they had a big list that you had to see a cavity being filled, you had to see, and different things. And in some surgeries, you mightn't get to see it all, and you might have to swap. But at the end of it, there was no dental nurse who had been through their work experience who was coming out saying, oh, geez, I've never seen that happen. And they might turn up in the end in a dental studio, in a dentist, sorry, this is trying to rush through things, in a dentist without the skills or the learning undertaken. And I also put in Largus because last year, we sent 400 students abroad to undertake work experience, but we also sent 100 teachers with them at the same time. And the teachers aren't distracted by anything else. The only thing they have is to help the students in the placement, to help them engage, to work with the employers. And in a way, I wish I could almost do that when I'm in Ireland, that if I could have my teachers that freed up for the week or the 2 week of placement, where they could engage that heavily, I think the teaching, the learning, and then obviously the assessment as an outcome of that would be mind-blowingly brilliant by comparison. Now, I put these two in here. So on the left, we've got Crumlin College, not canteen, restaurant. And when you send a trainee chef out to do their work placement, there's no way on this God's earth they would ever let them design the menu for the week nor decide all dishes. And so by running your own restaurant, we're able to change it, reach different learning outcomes, and not necessarily rely on what is totally unobtainable. And I put in a picture of the Rutland Street School, which is about to be renovated under the NEIC. And we've been in conversation with DCC, and we're hoping, well, the plan is that we're going to put a manager in there and we'll rotate, I know, don't worry, we'll end up breaking it. We're going to rotate people in every few weeks, and they'll run the restaurant, and it will be absolutely fabulous learning experience to run the real thing. I'm almost there. Oh, now, can I just say, hang on.
You've got 8 seconds.
I don't even. Hang on, my phone's making noises. We'll throw that away. I think the challenge is to try to get more employers to work with us, to have the staff free to work with them, to create true partnerships. And the other challenge is 80% of our employers are SMEs, and they have to see what is the return for them to invest that heavily. And I'm going to turn off this duck alarm on my phone.
Okay, actually your duck was the perfect gust to end anyway, because you were out of time, Blake. You were out of time, so your phone did it for you beautifully. But I got to go of my horn anyway, which was okay. So we're going to move on quickly, and we'll move on to Gillian O'Doherty from Accounting Technicians Ireland. Gillian, are you ready to go? Gillian, are you there?
Yes, I am talking to myself here. So
okay, perfect. I'll count you in. So Gillian,
okay.
And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, Costa.
Great. Well, good afternoon, and I just want to give you a flavour of ATI's work-based assessment process. And one of the things I'd like to talk about, obviously, is the context, the methods used, what we do well, what we continue to listen, hopefully, to our learners, our employers, industry, and obviously the colleges where we deliver. So as a professional body, I suppose I'm putting it up there in lights, that's who we are. We are also an awarding organisation under SIA, both North and South, recognised there, and a QQI provider for the purpose of apprenticeship. And so we cross both of those aspects of regulation, and we have an All Ireland experience, which I think is quite unique. We also have international recognition in terms of who we are. Our graduates tend to work mid to senior finance level, and our qualification is seen as a stepping stone. So it's really important that we get not only the academic element of our program right, but also our practical element. And because we are offering a program that has established exemptions through from professional accountancy across to HEI, it's really essential that we get the core competencies right, so that those that become accounting technicians can also seamlessly move on. So that comes down to good assessment, and it comes down to core competencies that are being delivered in the workplace. We I suppose are more aligned in a more structured way around work-based assessment. So we have, as I said, 2 programs, and those programs have been revalidated in 2020. So we feel that we are, in terms of the clear knowledge and skills requirements, are up to date in terms of what our employers need. We have our work-based learning and assessment is also very much an integral part of our curricula. We have alignment and mapping of our occupational profile, so what makes an accounting technician. The program and the module learning outcomes, the teaching, the learning and assessment are all aligned and mapped. Our assessment is aligned and mapped to specific learning outcomes, and they're credit bearing. So I know Geraldine was talking about differences there. Credit bearing is where we are, and we had a journey to get there. And the SIA award and the QQI award, they really mirror each other in terms of size, volume, demand. And just to give you an idea of learner effort there, we're looking at classroom 46% versus workplace training 54%, and likewise on the QQI award. So we're really heavily invested in giving good work-based learning. In terms of methods used, I know some of them have been touched on already by Lorna. We're talking about good learner guidance is ongoing. There's direct supervision from a qualified and trained, and training is so important for the workplace mentor. Centralized ATI, appointed examiners, graded by reference to a single set of grade categories, and summative work-based authentic tasks are in place. And once again, a personalized training plan is absolutely essential, because every workplace is different, every apprentice is different, and they progress at different levels and different pace. What we do well, just in my last few seconds, I'd say we place a strong focus on learner welfare and well-being and meeting the talent needs of employers generally. And therefore, if you take that as our starting point, we feel that we really give a strong sense of guidance throughout the program, be it on or off the job learning. And I just have included a quote there of a happy customer. In terms of what we do to continue to listen, new training plans, we are now running a credit-bearing work-based assessment. We've moved away from the pass-fail. And I know we are highlighting my time is up. We rewrote the whole program for validation for the purpose of incorporating credits from 2020. Thank you very much. Over to Terry. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. You made it with 4 seconds to spare, Gillian. Well done. Well done. And thank you very much. And I'd now like to hand over to John McCallick from UCD Business. John, are you okay? Are you good to go? Have you control of your slides?
Let's say yes. Thank you.
Okay. John, oh wait, you have to be counted in, John.
Oh yes, indeed. Okay.
Oh, you can't deny me my fun. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, Costa!
Hi, I'm John McCallick from UCD. I'm head of the accountancy section at UCD Business School. And I want to talk about the UCD Business School undergraduate internship program. So you can see here some of our employers. As you can see, they're mainly big companies. Some of them are international, some of them are Irish. The significant thing I think to note is that they all have fairly sophisticated HR departments, and this helps us a lot in the way that we can run our internship. So this is an optional pathway on the BCom and BSc Economics and Finance degrees. And I guess the significant thing is we have 209 students on this program. They complete an internship in stage 3 and it extends their degree to 4 years. They spend 9 to 12 months on internship. They have a full working week and academic component as well. All the positions are paid and paid quite well, usually at kind of graduate level. So it's a happy situation in that the students are very glad to get these opportunities, and generally they're able to get a lot out of it. What do we do on the program? Well, we have a boot camp before they go out that introduces them to the assessment and does other things like induct them into the workplace practices. We have a learning log, which is a reflective log. We try to emphasize that they are reflecting on their learning rather than, you know, a descriptive log. One innovative thing we've done for 209 students, it's difficult to get to everybody quickly. So we have a quick survey on our on Brightspace, our web service, to identify who's having problems or who wants to, you know, attention. And that means we get to them quicker. They do a business internship project. That's the assessment, as Geraldine has said, at the end of the internship. The grading is pass-fail distinction grading. Essentially, all the students do very well on this. This slightly surprised me when I got involved in the program. They're happy to talk about themselves and their experiences. So that has been good. Here's some internship reflections. The students are saying these logs have allowed for reflection on the challenges I faced over the course of my internship and also show the necessary steps I took to resolve these issues. Overall, keeping monthly records of my internship program has been a positive experience. And I guess one has to push this to the interns at the start. You've got to sell it to them as something that is going to be beneficial. And the second quote, is along the same lines. I would never get a true appreciation for what I've achieved and experienced if you didn't keep the logs. So they do work, I think, as a reflective experience. So what is our opportunity here? Well, making the most of what is a great opportunity and a transformative opportunity for the students, and they recognize it as a highlight in their degree if they get to do it. Our challenge is really providing high quality, timely feedback to the students. 209 students, they're putting in a log every month. Somebody has to give feedback on that. You start to do the maths over 9 months, plus reading a project as well. There's a lot of assessment there. We do use analytics to a certain extent to, organize all this and make sure that things keep flowing. And if you've got an internship on this scale, you need to think about how you're going to divvy up the work and how it's going to be organized using, some kind of analytics. The only real problem that we have is, keeping students motivated, keeping them doing the logs, making sure that their projects come in on time. So I guess this has been a description of, I was inspired by US universities in the design here. The first internship I was involved with was a US university. So you can see the influences here, I think. Thank you very much.
And thank you, John. And I stopped my fun again. But look, can I just, so that finishes our Augusta session. And just before I hand over to Geraldine again, can I just thank our 4 Augusta speakers? And I particularly like to thank the duck that came in to help me with Blake earlier on. Geraldine, I'll hand over to you now.
Okay, thank you. And again, thank you as well. That's very interesting. I just have 2 minutes here, maybe just to pull together some of the similarities and some of the differences listening to the four speakers there. Very interesting that many mentioned pass, fail, or distinction as a common way that they're doing it, whether it's credited or not credited, that's something that's very much in common across the board. Many of you mentioned the challenge with feedback, actually, and feedback to students in this context seems to be common with a few of you. Core competencies was coming through as something that is obviously how people organize and is a challenge. Many of you mentioned reflective logs in different forms and how, trying to work with them. Being an integral part of the curriculum is something, again, that is mentioned by a few, that it's really well designed with your curriculum and aligned with your curriculum. A couple of the different things, though, context. Blake, you were mentioning, very different contexts, and the challenge with very different contexts, students going into different places and in different ways. I mean, that's quite. Some people have much more similar contexts that they're working with, but very different contexts. Whether it's all Ireland or not all Ireland, some of you are dealing with different kind of areas or states as such. Whether it's optional or not is a difference. Some of them were optional and some of them were mandatory as part of professional accreditation. Some of them had difference in the weighting of the amount of it. Just how some of them are much heavier on the work-based experience than they maybe are on the sort of academic curriculum. And I think was it Gillian mentioned, was it Gillian the welfare? Sorry, was it Gillian that mentioned the welfare? But that was something that maybe others haven't mentioned. So some commonalities, but some differences, and it's interesting to see how they start. And what we thought we would do, just to involve yourselves now, the wider audience, we have a few minutes here to, you've heard some of the challenges and opportunities from the group here. So what we would like you to do is we want to get you to look at your challenges and your opportunities. And how we have done this is we have set up a Mentimeter. So I'll just go on to the slide. So if you have your phones handy there or on your computers, if you can go to www.mentimeter.com, and when you have done that, if you can add in the code 109462. So go to Mentimeter, www.mentimeter.com on your codes or on your computer. And if you put in the code 109462, we're going to ask you two questions. One is around your challenges, might be the same as your speakers here. And then when you've done one challenge, if you can do a second question, which is around opportunities. So I'll give you just a few seconds to do that. And I would ask Colin, if you wouldn't mind to start putting up the Mentimeter, which will also have the code on it, as people are doing their challenges. Great. Starting to come through here. Consistency, and actually that goes back to Peter Cullen's point in QQI, that consistency is one that's coming through. Resources to give good feedback, yes, and that was mentioned by two of our speakers. Gaining sustainable work placements, yes, the pure economics, yeah. Training, again, that came up with QQI. Consistency is coming through a lot. Training's coming through. Dealing with failure, that's a very interesting, how you're dealing with failure fairly. And I think Lorna mentioned just even the emotion that goes with grading and failure and feedback. Accountability. Feedback to and from the logs. Yes, the reflection is something that is very challenging for many people. Getting workplace supervisors to complete full and accurate reports. Yes, yeah, the workload. And I think Blake might have mentioned that as well. That just, you know, trying to having more staffing and more support with this. Volume of marking. Yeah, time is a big challenge. Yeah, yeah. Mentoring, training is definitely coming through. Assessor reliability, yeah, and actually that is particularly important, I think, the reliability piece, when you've got graded, you know, the difference between A and B and C and D, and doing that reliably. It can be slightly less of a challenge sometimes when it's pass fail, but reliability is particularly challenging with the more grades. Understanding the need to assess the placement, yeah. Not qualified training coming through, qualification, good placements, workload, yeah. I would ask you now, if you didn't mind, because maybe if you could actually start putting up some of the opportunities. So if you could start putting up some of the opportunities, what could be some things we think here can be an opportunity. Remember as well, in the times that we are with the changing world, is there any opportunities in this? Is there any opportunities from us getting together as a group? Authentic learning is an opportunity, yeah, yeah. Gaining experience for students. Increased collaboration with industry, yes, that is a great opportunity to actually linking in with industry. Yeah, greater engagement with employers. Finding good placements and opportunity, yeah, that's interesting. Employment, yeah, yeah. Online group work, yes, I think the technology, now that we're getting a little better at it, could be something that that the technology, online group work could be very peer sharing. The technology, even particularly, is something that can be used there. Students as creators, yeah. Employment of students, yeah, very interesting. Rotating placements might be an opportunity. More authentic real world assessment, absolutely. Securing employment to complete, yeah, work experience. Just looking at some of the chats as well, opportunities for the develop professional PhDs, yeah, coming through in the chat. Okay, so I'll let them come through. You can keep putting them in, but I might hand back to Terry now just for the last few minutes with the, you can keep adding if you like, but we'll collate those, Terry, won't we, and actually start to put them together, yeah.
So just I mean, this is very much the start of a conversation, everybody. So what we're planning to do now is that Ger and I will work on the kinds of challenges and opportunity in those themes, and we'll start discussions about them within our sort of community space. So over the next period, we've got our webinar today. We've just started the conversation. We're going to discuss further over the summer. We have a second webinar in October where we'll identify together over the summer the kind of key things that we want to discuss at that, and then we'll take that further again in our symposium in November. In terms of our community space, If you just go to the next slide, Colin. What we'll do is we're going to send you out a link to register for the community space. We would also, we'd encourage as many of you as possible to join the conversations. We've already put in some themes. So one of the themes that we're going to be talking about quite early on is the terminology. And I saw that in the chat. That was very important that we had that. And we're also, the second topic that we'll be talking on quite quickly will be some of the challenges based on the synthesis of some of the stuff that you put in Mentimeter today. Look, this is just really the start. And before everybody goes, I'm just conscious we're just we've got 2 minutes left, is that because it's the start, could I ask you to take 1 more minute and to go back into Mentimeter just again using code 5966 and tell us what is the one big thing? What if you had a choice of all the things to talk about in work-based assessment, what is the one big thing that you would like to discuss? And we'll bring that information back into the community, and we'll prioritize what needs to be discussed in these conversations over the coming months. Can I thank you all for all of your contributions? Can I thank our guest-hearers for their contributions? I'd like to thank Gers and Peter for facilitating, our partners QQI and the QQI teams and the National Forum teams that were looking at the chat. Questions that have been answered in the chat that we haven't had a chance to answer, we'll make sure we bring them into the community space to discuss them with you. So thank you very much. I hope this is just the beginning, and I look forward to working with you in the coming months.